Okay, and we are recording.
Cool.
Cool. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Annalise, and I work for Eats Park City as their education coordinator. Many of you may know it already, but we are a nonprofit based out of Park City, Utah, focused on connecting and growing our community through fresh, nutritious food. We host cooking and gardening classes to kids, advocate for healthy school lunches, and address food insecurity through our backpacks program. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Today, our webinar topic is eating for your lifestyle. We have two panelists here from Wasatch Fitness Academy, Will France and Michael Krasinski. So I'm super excited to hear and learn from you both. We have a chat box that you can use to share any sort of reflections or technical issues during our webinar, and also a Q&A to ask questions as the webinar goes on. We will address all of the questions at the end, so we'll have like 5 to 10 minutes at the end to answer questions as they come up. Also, we're recording this and I plan to share it to Facebook Live. So if you know anyone that didn't register that may want to tune in, tell them to go to Eats Park City Facebook page in just a moment and I'll get that up on there. So, all right, I guess we can get started. Hello, thank you all.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, my name is Will France. Annalise, if you want to pop me over to host, I will share a screen. But yeah, my name is Will France. I run my business called Will France Health Coaching. I teach people a lot about nutrition and how to eat for their goals and their lifestyle. Food can be a little harder than it needs to be sometimes, and really just trying to make it a little simpler for everybody. And let's see if that does the thing. Yeah, there we go. And then Michael is the gym owner where I also work. And would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. As Annalise said, my name is Michael Krasinski, and as Will said, I own and manage Wasatch Fitness Academy. We're a small gym, private community, about 1,000 square feet, and on average about 50 to 75 members at any given time. So we're a tight-knit community, and all of our people, almost all the athletes that we work with are kind of in the weekend warriors category: skiers and mountaineers and climbers and mountain bikers who would really rather be outdoors most of the time, but have hopefully figured out that they need to do some strength work to balance out their other activities. And so that's what we spend our time doing there, and the group that we work with. So for me, this topic about food is really, like, this is always the backbone of forward progress, whether it's health, fitness, physique, performance. It's all too easy to ignore the topic of food, which is why this is such a good one for us today.
For sure. And I always love working with Eats, because we tend to be pretty aligned on how we think about food for the most part, which is always nice when you meet people who are with you. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about like eating for your lifestyle, like trying to determine how to eat for your goals and figure out how we should be going through our day-to-day life, because not all of us should be eating the same. So, well, here's some of what we'll be covering. We're going to start a little bit about like what people mean when we say like quality food, high quality, like difference between ultra processed food and full ingredients. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about food timing and mention the intermittent fasting craze. It's really big right now, and talk about whether that really matters, and move a little bit into the importance of recovery and sleep, because if you're not doing either of those things, we're definitely not going to see results no matter how well you're eating. And then a little bit about some proper hydration and use of supplements and whether you should even consider them. And then last, we'll go a little bit into what we can realistically expect to achieve with food, and how we can set some good goals for ourselves. And then we'll give you a little bit of an offer at the end and time for Q&A. So very simply, if we can improve how we eat, we can increase our energy, transform your body, and renew your passion for life. Because if you're not eating well, you're not fueling well, and you just feel tired most of the time. As someone who like beat myself near death for 10 to 15 years, I can speak to this really heavily. And if you're just not fueling yourself properly, you're not gonna have a lot of success. So let's talk about like why food matters to us a little bit. For me, I grew up overweight. I was obsessed with what I ate to some degree. As a teenager, I was always trying to feel better and look better, and never really performed as well as I wanted to in the sports field. And somewhere in college, I made changes by working myself into the ground by like the 2 hours a day of workout and under eating. And I created a different and fairly unhealthy relationship with food. It felt good. It worked for a long time until it didn't. And then immediately gained a lot of the weight back and went into some hormonal dysfunction and just really kind of wrecked myself in the process. And since learning how to eat and improving that relationship with food, I'm more productive. Like I sleep more, I feel better, and I'm also a better person and friend, because when you're undernourished and overworked, you tend to be not the best to be around. So that's kind of why food matters to me so much and why I started on this, because there's a good amount of misinformation, but even more so, we have a lot of struggles with how we think about it and what we're really trying to achieve. So it's want to help share that with other people and make the change. And I know, Michael, you have your own story regarding food as well.
Yeah, as a kid, like I grew up in a family that didn't really value physical fitness, physical health very much. Food was very much a comfort. It was one of the few things that I think brought us together as a family. And so there was often too much of it and not enough really good stuff. And then the like flip side of that was that my mom took out her body image issues on me, which left me with kind of this lifelong obsession with physique and always kind of attaching my self-worth to what I saw in the mirror, as dysfunctional as that totally is. And it's taken me a long time, and arguably I'm still trying to figure this out for myself, but it's how to enjoy what I'm capable of, and therefore teaching other people really hopefully to enjoy what they're capable of as well, and making life and happiness about things other than how we look, ideally more about what we can do, and our ability to see progress in our sports or in activities and in our relationships.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just shifting stuff around here because my computer doesn't want to cooperate, because of course it never cooperates when you want it to. All right. Where are you? There. Cool. So that's us, and that's why this matters so much to us. Food is a big tool and a great source of happiness, but it can also be a lot of struggle. So that's why we're trying to help other people change a little smoother. So before we get into it, we're going to talk about what to eat and without giving up our favorite foods. Like I think that's a big thing for me. I've done all the diets in the past, and the ones that tell me I can't eat pizza means I'm not going to stick with that diet. I don't think I should be able to have it every day, but pizza matters to me and I want to be able to eat it. So like the couple months I spent in keto were pretty miserable for that reason. We're also going to talk about some topics that might seem a little off base, like sleep and mindset. But as I mentioned in the intro, if you aren't sleeping, then you really can't achieve any of the goals you want to get. And we've touched on a little bit, but we're going to discuss relationships with food, both our own a little more, and then some of general relationships with food and people that we've worked with. And again, we're going to let you know how you can learn a little more about working with us and give you a little bit of a freebie at the end. So I truly believe that if you improve your food, you're going to improve your life. It's just it's been a one-to-one relationship in mine. If I can eat better and fuel myself better, I tend to be happier and just a little easier to be around and generally more functional in my day-to-day. So we're going to teach you how to do that here. And we're going to start with what to eat. So eats is very clearly a focused organization on what to eat. They teach children to farm and harvest, and I love all that. And that's why we're so well aligned. And if we want a quick and simple guide on what we should eat, we really don't have to go much further than Michael Pollan's food rules from like 10, 15 years. I think it was 2009. So about 10 years ago. And it's basically a long explanation of something he wrote over 15 years ago of eat food, not too much, mostly plants. 7 words, and that's really all we need. And basically touches on what did your great grandmother eat? Would she recognize the things in your pantry? And trying to read ingredients and labels and look at your fridge and see how much of it is actually food and how much of it is food-like substances. And Michael, does that sound kind of right to you? I know you've done a lot of this as well.
Yeah, and I think that is the other way of saying that is eat things that kind of look like it did when it was in the ground, or that had a face, as a as a simple rule. And each of us is going to decide where we want to fit on the carnivore versus plant-based kind of spectrum. But at the end of the day, the less easy rule is the less processed something is, the higher nutrient density it's going to have, the lower calorie density it's going to have, and it makes it possible to eat more without without negative side effects. The challenge though for a lot of us is that those things require time and attention and effort. They might require some skill and preparation, and they're not going to give us some of the immediate satisfaction that we get out of things like pizza. And I'm with Will on this one. Like, the diet that says there's no pizza is probably not the right one. Diet that says anything is 100% off limits forever is probably not the right answer. But as a general rule, if 80% of what you're eating looks like it did when it was alive, you're probably making some good choices.
Yep, and fully agree with that. And sure, there's the occasional rarity where you might need to cut out something forever, but it's not common. Like if you have celiac disease, of course you shouldn't eat gluten, right? Like it's not great. But for most people, we can get away with a lot more leeway and use food for all of its purposes. I mean, food tastes great, right? Like that's a large purpose there, and we should be able to enjoy it as well as like have it fuel us. In that we should respect our personal needs too. Like, not everybody is going to have the same diet. That's why I'm not a fan of fad diets, be they Weight Watchers or keto or whatever. It's not that they don't work, it's that they don't work for everybody in all circumstances. Like if you are trying to be a athlete and you need some glucose to fuel that, trying to cut all sugar from your diet might not be the best idea. And if you don't feel good after you eat something, like some people are particularly touchy on nightshades, which is like bell peppers, eggplants, tomatoes. And if you don't do well with those and you feel bad after them, then you probably shouldn't eat them, or accept that you're going to feel like crap for 3 days after you eat them. But we need to respect those needs, know what it does to us, and act accordingly. And on that note, like Michael said, food should probably look fairly similar to what it looked like in nature, like when it was harvested to your plate. As few changes as possible is probably going to be the best. But we also have things like organic and GMO and local. And right now there's a lot of questions on how much of that actually matters. And the honest answer is I'm not sure, right? Like we don't know the exact answer to that. It's probably better to go as organic and non-GMO and local as you can, because that's what we've been doing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's time tested. We've done really well with that as a species. There are some GMOs that do fine. Technically, the orange carrot is genetically modified. It was bred to be that way. It used to be much more multicolored. That was common. And we bred them to be orange because they're cool. But now we've taken that a little further, where we have a ton of pesticides in our food and things are not doing very well for our gut. So trying to split that balance and do what we can within our budget is a daily effort, right? Like I don't always buy organic. I can't like always afford to do that, but I buy the best quality that I can afford. And then with local's probably the biggest thing I try to do as much as I can, because the lack of shipping is always a good deal. So but at the end of the day, we're not 100% sure where any of this sits. And we just have to try our best to buy the best quality food that we can do. Like, Michael, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good graphic that I kind of wish that we had added into this, and it's basically what are the things that we should prioritize if we're going to try to clean up our diet for any given reason. We're trying to clean up our diet for performance, or we want to eat better for the sake of fat loss or for longevity. And we'll talk a little bit more about the variance between those kinds of outcomes: performance, longevity, physique. But you know, organic is going to have an impact, but organic is going to have a smaller impact than gross calorie intake. You know, the individual who's trying to go from 300 pounds to 180 pounds, whether or not their tomatoes are organic is a much smaller factor than how much they're eating and then how much processed foods. Really easy example of this: Whole Foods a couple of years ago started selling Justin's peanut butter cups. And if you look at the nutrition label for Justin's peanut butter cups, and you look at the nutrition label for Reese's peanut butter cups, Justin's is probably better chocolate, but let's not be fooled that a product that costs 3 times as much and has the word organic on it, that it makes any difference in that particular instance about what decision you make. If you really like it, go for it. If you prefer Reese's, please don't think you're doing anything wrong. Moderation is, of course, key. So these ideas do matter, but they sit within kind of the overall spectrum. If you're eating largely high quality food, unprocessed food, and you can't afford, or you just opt to not pay for grass-fed beef at the grocery store, it's like so not worth stressing it if everything else is going pretty well. And if you're not checking those other boxes of like regularly eating colorful veggies, well, let's just start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of the opinion that for the organic GMO local stuff, like, it is a much bigger impact on the environment than it is your health most of the time, which means like I care about it, but that's a real thing to recognize. Like, a non-organic head of broccoli is still pretty good. It might not be as good. There are probably some pesticides in it, but it's like still probably better in every way than a Twinkie. And that is environmental all the way up to what it does to your body. So yeah, that's kind of where that sits. The more food, again, the more food looks on your plate like it did in nature, the better off you're probably going to be. And all that said, though, like, I really just want people to be proud of what they eat. Like, that's a big thing for me. Occasionally we should allow ourselves some freedom to enjoy like garbage food. I say that jokingly, it's how I refer to it, but we shouldn't have this shame about our food that we often have. Like, that, I think, causes way more damage than anything else. Like, if you choose to eat a pizza and then you feel terrible about it and then you end up in a spiral, that's how we end up in a problem. Whereas if we can just own it, like, I want that food today and I'm going to go eat it, that tends to avoid the restrict binge cycle. It tends to be a lot better for your health. It's better for your mental health, and you actually end up eating less of it in the long run because you don't have this like shame spiral that we all end up in. Yeah.
The word cheat meals is something that I kind of disallowed with my clients years ago. And it was instead a shift towards like, this is a planned break, or this is a planned off-plan meal, right? Where we're just saying, look, like, yeah, it's an event, it's a whatever, it's your birthday. There's a new Marvel movie coming out, and you're going to go to the movie theater and like down, the 5-quart thing of popcorn. Yeah, like, you're going to do that, and it's not awesome, but you can recover from it and like by all means enjoy it, and then like kind of get that out of your system and get back to the day-to-day task of eating well.
For sure. And God, I hate the term cheat day so much. Yeah, I'll call it a feast day or some kind of thing. But yeah, cheat day, it is inherently shameful that we call it that. It doesn't work. And to that end, we should also probably recognize like everybody's on a spectrum, right? But like we're usually either a little more towards the abstainer end or towards the moderator end. And some of us even have certain foods that kind of fall into both of those categories. I can have all the popcorn in my house in the world and I'm not going to binge on it. It can be a nice like snack. If I have any ice cream in my house, it will be gone tomorrow. So like I forget which comedian said this, but it's like, why does it have a lid? It just needs that saran wrap and then take it across and eat it. Like, actually, I think that might've been you, Michael. Like I fully agree with that to no end. Yeah, I will. A tub of ice cream is a serving, no matter how large the tub. Moving on, like from there, we can also talk a little bit about when to eat. It's a lot of myths and information in this space, and probably all of it has some truth to it, but it's how we put it into place. So intermittent fasting, or time restricted eating, probably more accurately, has become a big thing lately. People lose weight or try to feel better or improve their whatever through restricting their feeding window to a shorter amount of time, which is not a bad idea. So if we are living like our standard American diet lifestyle, we tend to wake up early for work, we eat immediately, and then we kind of eat all the way through the day until we go to bed. And that's not great. We should probably spend a little less time eating than we do not eating. Like that's kind of my general rule. Try to split your day in half, maybe. It does a lot for your body, recovery systems, all these things. Also, if you're trying to lose a little weight, it tends to just accidentally cut your calories, which is nice, which isn't always good for everybody. Like we'll get into this a little more later, but if you're trying to lose some weight and you're in a pretty good space and you are moving somewhat a good amount throughout the day, restricting your feeding window is probably a good idea. I'm not talking about the 1 meal a day thing. Like that's a popular thing right now amongst some people. I did that for years. It did very well for me to lose 50 pounds. It did a lot of damage to my hormones and cortisol curve and all sorts of stuff. So we need to kind of figure out how much we need to fuel and split that throughout the day in a way that serves us well. If you can eat large amounts in one sitting, maybe only a couple meals is good for you. If you have a much smaller stomach, like some people are just different, you might want to do more of a snacky thing throughout the day. But regardless, if we spend a little more of our day not full, that's better. And that's mostly because it allows if your body is actively digesting food, it is spending a lot of energy towards that and not towards other processes. Like house cleaning, basically, is what your body does on a daily basis. And if we're constantly fed, we do a lot less of that internal house cleaning. So if we can spend a little less time fed, we get a little more time for house cleaning. And Michael, do you have anything on that before I dive into either workout nutrition or like the myth of eating right before bed or anything?
Yeah, I feel, the kind of the research on intermittent fasting seems to point to, anecdotally, like we all know someone who swears by intermittent fasting, and we know somebody who swears by keto. And 20 years ago, it was the people who swore by South Beach and Atkins, which is just another, it's just another brand name for the ideas of keto. And, we all know people who've had really great luck with these and where these things have worked. What we got to remember, and especially in a fat loss mission, and what we got to remember is that by and large, fat loss is going to be driven by being in a calorie deficit, and sustainability is driven by you enjoying it enough to stick to it. And, and for a lot of people, if we shift the diet one way or another, it makes it really easy to get into a calorie deficit. Intermittent fasting fits into that same category. But the flip side can also be true for somebody with a funky enough metabolism, right? If someone's been eating under, we're not diving deep into fat loss on this webinar, something Will and I are always happy to talk about if you're ever interested. But if someone's been eating in a caloric deficit for a long time to the point that their weight loss is pretty much plateaued, and they're like, man, I don't know how to eat less. Well, the way that I know how to eat less is by eating. I'm only going to allow myself to eat for 4 hours a day, and I'm going to fast the other 20. Well, might you lose a little bit more weight? Yeah, but you're applying a new lever to a metabolism that's already over leveraged. You're probably eating way below. That's why you were eating below calorie needs. That's why you lost weight. But the thing that you need next is not a bigger lever to lean into the thing. You actually probably need to give your body a little bit of a break, take a little bit of time off, and then reset. So while intermittent fasting, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about exercise too, why these are potentially really great strategies for helping with fat loss if that's the mission, it is really, really easy to take it too far to the point that it becomes detrimental at the end.
Yeah. And absolutely true. There's very little data on intermittent fasting that it does a whole lot for any purpose other than it accidentally cuts your calories and it gives your body a little more time to heal. And then there have been a couple studies where if you shift your eating window earlier in the day, so if you want to do this, and it does seem to be your goal, like making your window more like 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., those are the only studies that have been done where it's been an isolated variable that's been beneficial. I like to eat dinner with my girlfriend, and she's not going to eat dinner at 3 p.m. So that just doesn't fit into our life very well. So that's the biggest thing. And then on that note, eating right before bed is also probably not great. And it has nothing to do with the myth of you're not burning the calories, you're not going to sit there or whatever. It has to do with the fact that you're not going to sleep super well. If you're digesting, you're not resting. So if you eat a big meal right before bed, you're not going to sleep very well. And as we're going to talk about next, if you don't sleep very well, nothing else is going to happen. Sleep is the linchpin of most things. And as someone who is actively screwing up my sleep right now to groom at Park City because I enjoy it, I can tell you I'm a lot more wrecked than I was a month ago when I wasn't doing that. Biggest thing we can really talk about for timing and when it really matters is workout nutrition. If you are generally well fed and you are training a couple times a week or 2, 3, whatever, it also isn't a big deal. If you're eating a well-varied diet of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, it's going to work. Your body will work it out. If you are training heavily, every day or even more than that, twice a day, we need to fuel workouts properly in order to make sure we're recovering properly to support that extra work. That's really the issue here. It's a recovery issue more than it is actually fueling the workout. And there is a long nerdy science to that I'm not going to dive into very deep right now. But if you're interested, let us know. And that is what it really matters. If you are training heavily and you need to eat shortly before and shortly after a workout in order to fuel those upcoming workouts, basically.
And Will, what do you see as being the threshold for quote unquote training or exercise, right? If someone's going to go out and ski a half day at a resort, or going to go take a few laps in the backcountry, or they're going to the gym to go do a yoga class or a spin class, how do you categorize exercise related to nutrient timing?
So it comes a little bit to goals, which you'll hit at the end, but it's really what we're focusing on. If you're focused on performance, and that's our big deal here. If we want to do well in the backcountry, we want to do well in that ski vacation, I would favor a little more on the food and calorie side than I would not. And so if you're in doubt, probably eat the food if performance is your goal. And especially if you are I know there's a fairly wide audience here. If anybody here has done a workout that's basically left them a crippled mass on the floor at the end, or where you can't really move and you're just gassed, like you should probably get some carbs and protein into you pretty quickly to restore that glycogen, or else you're going to be tapped out for a while. It is on a like the sugar in your body is on a long-term storage basis. It's not immediate. So the faster we can get in there, the better, so that we can perform well the next day. And it'll also help mitigate your cortisol, your stress response, so that your brain doesn't and your hormones don't go into chaos, basically. You end up with dysfunction.
Yeah, and I just want to layer in on that. We'll kind of preface that statement with, if you've ever done a workout that has left you a crumpled mass on the floor, and the reality is, well, if it's leaving you a crumpled mass on the floor, hopefully it was for a really good reason, right? Hopefully there's something that you were going to gain from that kind of a workout. But the other is, if you finish a workout, if you go to the gym or if you're out for a run, a really good marker is do you immediately feel ready to go and have a social conversation with someone that you know, not especially well, like someone that you have to like pay a little bit of attention to the conversation, but someone with a relationship you're invested in the absence of alcohol or any other substances, caffeine included. Like, could you go and be social and really kind of present the best possible version of yourself and like truly enjoy the experience? And if not, then that is actually an indication that your nervous system is a little bit fried. And as Will had said, putting in a little bit of carbs can be really helpful for that. And that's a moment where, when we talk about movement and exercise, those kinds of workouts serve a purpose. We're the ones that crush you. But for a lot of us, major wins are going to be from more sustainable workouts that we can do time and time again, that the beauty is they actually require less thought about the nutrition around them. If you're going to go to the gym and do a well-planned strength session for 45 minutes, you probably don't have to do crazy things with food. Eat some protein and carbs before, eat some protein and carbs after. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Like most of the supplements I have in my pantry are for when I go too hard, or like too hard is probably incorrect, but like when I plan to destroy myself for other benefits, like that's kind of what they're for. If we're just training normally, just eat food. Like it goes really well. So on that note, we'll dive a little bit into recovery and stress. Said it at least twice already. Sleep matters. If you're not sleeping, that's why you're not seeing results. And I can speak to that as someone who's worked night work for like the past 4 years, my first winter in a while where I'm not working night shift. There's very little more that's more important than sleep when it comes to any of these things. If you're not sleeping, your fat loss is going to be diminished. Your performance is absolutely going to be tanked. You're going to be less of a nice, friendly, amiable person. You're going to get injured way more easily, and you're going to recover from them less easily. And we live in a culture where a lot of us don't really prioritize sleep. We work very hard. We push ourselves very hard. I slept an average of probably 5 hours a night for the better part of 10 years because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And then I hit is an understatement, crashed headlong into a wall, and the wheels came off when I was about 30, and it was a fire. And I'm still working on figuring out how to like recover some cortisol and hormone balance from that. So we need to prioritize sleep. There is no making up sleep on the weekends. You incur a sleep debt and you just kind of move forward. So we need to make that a priority and kind of fit it into our life. So it's a big one there. And yeah, we'll talk about eating enough in a sec, but anything on sleep, Michael?
No, I think you got it. I mean, if you as a human, if you believe that you're doing things right and most things are in line, a really good indicator is on a regular basis, do you feel hungry? On a regular basis, are you usually happy? Is your demeanor fairly content? Outside of hard things happening in life or crazy things happening in the world. And then the last one is your libido in check? Do you regularly feel horny, to be frank about it? And if so, then your hormones are in pretty good balance and your sleep is probably not too bad. But if you notice that any of those three things or your sleep is slipping, then odds are really good that there is something, some underlying factor. And it could be maybe you're not moving enough, maybe you're sitting too little, maybe there's too much emotional stress in your life, maybe you're not eating enough, right? There's a lot of variables there. But it's certainly sleep along with those other things is a really good place to start looking for indicators that things aren't working well.
Absolutely. And like we should have these normal processes, like whether it's, as Michael said, like a sex drive or whatever. Most of these hormones regulate overnight, and that's why if we're not sleeping, all of these things go poorly. And that includes our hunger signals, like all of these things kind of reestablish as we sleep, specifically during deep sleep. So if we're not getting any of that, we end up with dysregulation in hormones. And we can further test that by whether you are like kind of when you wake up, are you ready to go? Or does it take 12 cups of coffee to get you moving? Like that should be we should be kind of geared in the morning. Our cortisol should be a little higher and it should motivate us to get moving. It should like crank our dopamine a little bit and then should fade throughout the day. And then our melatonin should raise. And when it's time to go to bed, you should be ready to sleep. And if any of those things aren't true and our hunger signals aren't there or any of these processes aren't signaling us that we're supposed to keep moving through our day, something is probably a little tweaked. And one of the big things there that I see is like, are you eating enough? And this is actually my primary use of calories with people in my private clients. Like calories are a very complex subject. All packaged foods and restaurants are allowed to be off by like 30%. They're very hard to predict. They are highly processed food. You actually absorb more of the calories than you do from less processed food. So like using them as the be all end all is a really poor choice. Most people can do very well by just prioritizing these whole like good quality foods, increasing your fiber, increasing your protein. All of these things tend to do just as well, if not better for most people than a focus on calories. But if we have a long history of dieting or overtraining or undersleeping, like me on the trifecta there, you can end up with some adjustments to your metabolism. It's not broken. It's working exactly as it's supposed to. Like I basically told my body that I was trying to kill it for the better part of a decade. And it adapted accordingly to keep me alive. And that's what we do. But if we don't know that's happening, then we end up in issues because we like try to cut calories when they're already lower than they're supposed to be and all these things. So again, it is a semi-complicated process that I'm happy to talk to any of you about, but we need to make sure we're eating enough to support our lifestyle. That's why it's called like eating for your lifestyle. Michael Phelps ate 10,000 calories a day to win the Olympics. If I did that, I would be fat within a month and probably throw up most of it. And then some people do, like a child needs to eat way less than I do. It's like an active male adult. So we just need to eat enough to support our activity. Yeah, that's all I really have on that. And we will send this to Michael because he is much better on the movement aspect than me.
Yeah, and well, this is, and Will spoke to this from his experience, and this is mine too, that, actually training too much, exercising too much, not eating enough and not doing enough on the downside, not doing enough on the recovery side. And so I like to think of exercise as being this double-edged sword. And this idea is going to come up again in a little bit too. So, well, if you miss the idea this time, it'll make more sense in a minute. But, exercise is inherently stressful. If someone goes to the gym to lift weights and they decide that they really want to have big arms, they want to have big biceps, they're going to do lots of bicep curls. And how many bicep curls do they need to do? Well, the rule is you want to do about as many as you can and recover within a day or two so you can go do it again. And if you have to recover from something, then a pretty good rule of thumb is it's causing some stress. When we train, when we exercise, when we go for a run, we're imparting a stress onto the system, and we're hopeful that that stress will make us stronger. That's why we do these things. Exercise can be very stress reducing, and some things probably more so than others. For some of us, like going to a boxing class is really, really therapeutic and cathartic. But we got to remember that if we're breathing that hard and working that hard, we're imparting some stress to the system. If we go to the other side, at the other end of the spectrum, and go take a meditative, slow yoga class, also stress reduction for some of us who enjoy it. But the stress on the system is very, very different than it would be in a boxing class. And the difference between good stress and bad stress, or eustress and distress, is a really thin line, but it's one that we have to understand. If someone is already in a huge calorie deficit because they're trying to lose body fat, and they make that calorie deficit even bigger by training for 20 hours a week, then the system is going to respond in a way of probably kind of trying to protect itself and shut stuff down. So we've got to push against that line without crossing over it. And, when it comes to getting better at skiing or running or mountain biking, this, point number 4 here is the key that I want you to walk away with, which is that your recovery resources have got to exceed the stress that you impart on the body. If you're under eating, under sleeping, under recovering because you're always stressed. I mean, I've got an 11.5-week-old son at home. Like, I would love to be out skiing and mountain biking, given what the winter looks like in Salt Lake City right now. But I'm spending a lot more of my time at home. And part of that is because I want to be with my son. I want to be with my wife. Those things are absolutely true. The other piece of this is that I know that if I were to go and push myself as hard as I want to, I'm actually going to be overstressed, and I might be able to recover from it, but I'm not going to be very useful as a dad and as a husband and as a partner at home. And that's just not an acceptable balance for me. So it's kind of forcing me to make some of these shifts and decide how to spend my time. And, the last piece that I'll just speak to here real quick is, I think for most of us when it comes to physical movement is that we should have cycles of intensity. We should go easy for a while and then a little bit of time going really hard. That might mean one hard workout a week, or, one hard race every season, right? People who are running marathons, like, go all out for one marathon. The rest of the season is about building yourself up for that. But if we try to push hard every single day, every single time, burnout, injury, excessive fatigue are unfortunately going to come up, and you cannot out-eat a bad diet. I mean, that's the end of this. If you're pushing that hard with your training, you're not eating well, you're not eating enough. The things that you think you're after in life, they're probably going to stall out. Will, anything to add?
That's pretty much it. Basically, there's a reason that every professional sports has an off season. Like, you need to recover. If you don't, you're screwed. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Cool. Moving here a little bit into like some hydration and supplements, because they matter and they're very heavily discussed. Quick reminder, I'm neither of us nutritionists, dietitians, doctors, like no ability to prescribe anything here. But I'm happy to talk to you science all day about vitamins and minerals. First, you should probably drink water. Like, that is the big thing with hydration. We should drink water, and we should probably drink more of it, most of us. And for most people, if you're even somewhat in touch with your body, drinking to thirst is actually a really good metric. There's been 8 glasses a day or whatever. I should not drink, or even better example, when I was biking 40 miles a day as a delivery guy in the summer in Arizona, I needed more water than now. I'm sedentary, sit at a computer most of my day in Utah, like in the winter in Utah. It was at least double the average consumption. And thirst regulated that for sure. Like, I was thirsty all the time. And if you're not very in touch with your body, just keep an eye on your pee. It should be light yellow. If it's clear, you're probably drinking too much water. And if it's golden, you need to drink more. Like, it's a very simple metric, and it doesn't need to be obsessive. If you are more of a numbers person, if you take your body weight and divide it by 2 and then like add 15, that's probably ounces of H2O that would support an active lifestyle. But that's going to be very person dependent and very, like, even individually, so a little bit day to day, depending on salt intake and all sorts of other things.
So Will, where does coffee soda, tea fit into liquid intake?
They would all actually count. The only one that really wouldn't would be alcohol. Coffee, tea, and soda are a little bit diuretic due to the caffeine, but not nearly as much as they are beneficial to hydration because they're still like over 99% water. So that said, like soda or whatever has other effects to it. So getting all of your hydration through soda means you're probably getting well over your carb intake from sugar, which isn't great. And if you're getting all of your proper hydration space throughout the day from coffee, it means you're drinking caffeine way too close to bedtime. So they have side effects, but that morning cup of coffee would definitely count towards hydration.
Okay.
Yeah. The only way it really wouldn't is if you drink that like a big morning cup of coffee and then don't drink water for like the next 8 hours, then you're going to end up in trouble because you need to rehydrate. Again, it is a diuretic. It's going to leave your system a little faster, but if you continue to replenish, it will be okay. And then on the like realm of supplements, they can be helpful. We talk about vitamins and multivitamins and minerals and all sorts of stuff. It is really hard to get all of your necessary vitamins and minerals in the modern world with the way we live. We were designed to, we evolved to create, like eat food that was grown in the ground in like a well-soiled ground. And we evolved outside where we like got a ton of sunlight exposure, and we don't do that anymore. We sit here in front of a computer inside with minimal sunlight, and we're not very active, and it's tough. So people might benefit from things like a bit of vitamin D, some magnesium. Our soil is legitimately depleted from magnesium from where it was 50 years ago because of our poor farming practices. So that is a tough thing to get from just food. That said, we should try. It is not, supplements are not a crutch, they're a tool. And I don't really recommend any of them until working with people for a little while, because they shouldn't be the first plan of attack. And things like vitamin D are actually fat soluble. You can take too much of it. It's very difficult unless you're a construction worker in the summer in our modern world, but it is absolutely possible to take too much vitamin D and end up in a worse place than where you started. So simple blood test can help. Keeping an eye on your intake can help. Like if I'm tracking my food, I use an app that actually tracks how much magnesium I eat, and I am regularly low because it's just hard. But supplements are useful. They're a useful tool. They're not a crutch. And that's really, really what I have for here. And that includes things like protein powder. It can be a great tool if you're trying to recover. I have a bag or two of it in my pantry right now. I use it on heavy training days, but I try to get most of my protein through Whole Foods. And I know you're the same, but anything else to add?
No, I mean, I will. I'm, again, 11 and a half week old baby at home. I consume way more protein powder right now than I usually would, and than I would recommend for anyone else. It is probably the better part of half of my protein intake in a day. But it is the, morning. I can make oatmeal and down some protein in about 5 minutes, which is what my life demands of me at the moment.
Yep, fully support that. I'm eating as much now that I'm not sleeping from being out till like 3 a.m. some nights for work as I was using when you and I were in that big training cycle in July. So it's like, yeah, you just got to live with your life and use it, but it is a tool. Like, but yeah, that's really the point there. All right, and last, goal setting, because if we're not like actually figuring out our goals, none of this really works out. So what can we reasonably expect to achieve with food? It's actually a lot. Like it's a huge part of our existence with the world. Our digestive tract is technically exposed to the outside world. It is how we interact with the outside world on like a very personal level. Everything you eat goes through you and ends up in your system. And it affects really every aspect of your life. But if we don't know what our priorities are, we are going to struggle to actually achieve any of them, because we can really hit three major things with food, be it like performance, longevity, or aesthetics. And you're not going to target all three of them very well at the same time. So performance, if we're trying to increase performance in the gym, or if we really just want to have a good ski season because this sucks and we want to maximize every day that we get out there, and that's really our focus, we shouldn't be in a calorie deficit. Like, that's a very, very big deal there. Like, we need to fuel that performance. Not a single NFL linebackers ever been in a calorie deficit in season, or else they wouldn't be recovering. And same with the other end there for aesthetics. Like, if we want to lose weight, if we want to get shredded, if we want to like really lose body fat for the most part, we do need to be in a calorie deficit. And that is just a law of physics. There's a ton of ways to achieve that, if we discussed in the past. Like, there's a reason that every diet works. They all have their tools. But if we're trying to lose fat, we need to be in an overall calorie deficit, and you're not going to perform very well like that. And then we also can like target longevity. If we're trying to live to be 120, like, all professional sports take some time off your life. That's just almost certainly true. They are very tough on you and require a lot from recovery. If we want to perform well or lose some body fat, one of the better ways to do that is actually to consume a slightly higher protein diet, which has been shown to not necessarily be the best for like permanent longevity. So trying to mix those things at the same time is not great. It's really inefficient. Whereas if we can target all three of them separately and kind of cycle through and see a lot of results in all aspects. So if we want to be in a performance phase, let's focus on performance and try and increase our weight in the weight room and improve our times, and then take a minute to take a couple months to lose whatever fat we gained in that process, and then take a couple months to reestablish homeostasis in our body and really prioritize longevity and let it heal itself. And then we can go through this cycle. And depending on, like, if you weigh 350 and you want to lose weight, we need to spend a little more time in that deficit than we would in either of the other two, or probably a lot more. Very bluntly, I know I did when I was losing the weight originally. But we need to figure out what we're trying to achieve, prioritize, and then cycle through these goals if we're going to have success at any of them. And then last, like, we need to recognize what we're willing to give up and what we're not willing to give up. Like I told you earlier, I'm not willing to give up pizza for the rest of my life. So keto is a really bad choice for me. It just is. For some people, it works great. Mark Sisson is like the owner of Primal Kitchen and Mark's Daily Apple. He's multi-million-dollar empire on keto. Good for him. It's great for him. We need to respect our goals and kind of figure out what we're willing to give up and what makes us happy, and lean into that. If you have anything, Michael, go for it.
No, I mean, just Will and I, before we hopped on today, Will and I were talking a little bit about this and talking about some clients that we've both worked with. And I had someone who came to me a few years ago at 300 pounds, and he'd already lost 50 and was like kind of stuck, and his goal was to get down to really 180. And the challenge that he ended up with was actually, to Will's point number one here, what can you reasonably expect to achieve? And he was after happiness, right? Like his unhappiness was his driver, and that continually backfired. And it backfired with with getting kind of on a binge and getting on some really down on himself, some very low self-esteem stuff. And, what he was wrestling with was, how can I be, the question he never asked, and the question took me too long to ask as a coach, was how can you be happy now? Like, let's figure out what happiness looks like now. Let's do that work, because 180 pounds with abs isn't going to be the thing that actually makes you happy. If you can be happy, 180 pounds with abs is going to be a heck of a lot easier to get to. But maybe it also at the end of the day doesn't matter. Maybe there's other things, but just that like those conflating goals of, you know, what it is that we want and then what it is that we really want. Like we think we want a thing, but like we want a Tesla, but what does a Tesla really represent for us? And I think that's something that all too many of us go into these journeys without considering.
Absolutely. I mean, as someone with a six pack and like some level of depression, they are not like one does not necessarily help the other. They are absolutely
crazy.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah.
All you.
Now, I kind of touched on this idea earlier, but I would just want to reiterate this. And the answer is no. You cannot out-exercise a bad diet. You can't out-exercise you can't out-train a bad diet. You know, the runners who we all know who say, man, I run 80 miles a week so that I can eat whatever I want. It just takes one good injury, one good ankle roll, one good knee tweak, and like, now what are you going to do? Because you haven't set up a good relationship with food. So put these ideas in our minds, right? Calories matter a lot. If you're under eating, you are by definition going to be under recovering. And if your goal is fat loss for a length of time, that's actually okay. But if your goal is performance, or you just want to feel really good and have the energy to do the things that you need to do, hitting a reasonable volume of calories, reasonable energy intake each day truly matters. And Will and I are not saying, hey, go out like 2,000 calories is on the back of every package is the right answer. We need to figure it out for ourselves individually, but it does matter. Not all calorie sources are equal. You know, if you're eating a real high Twinkie diet and you're a runner and you're not getting faster, well, maybe it's the Twinkies. Could be other things too, but calorie sources matter. And, you know, and then again, not all exercise is created equal either. Running is a much higher stress activity than walking, right? Hiking is going to be somewhere in the middle. Weightlifting or strength training is going to be really high on that stress level. And so if you're choosing an activity that's got a really high stress level, bear in mind that you need to spend the time recovering. And just a personal story, when my wife and I first moved out to Utah 8 years ago, we used to go to a yoga class every Sunday at Centered City in downtown Salt Lake City. And we would get thrashed. Like I teach yoga, I teach hard yoga classes. These yoga classes were like leaving me on the floor drenched. And my wife and I would go out to dinner or go out to brunch rather at a diner. And like, we just order all the food because we're like, oh my God, we worked so hard in that last 75-minute yoga class. But it was actually a sense of it being really hard, really stressful. But we didn't burn nearly the volume of calories that we thought we had. And so we've got to consider that like sometimes exercise feels really hard, but that doesn't necessarily mean it took a lot of energy or that it's going to need a lot of recovery. And sometimes things that feel like no big deal can actually be putting us into a huge deficit that we have to recover from.
Absolutely. Yeah, just on the not all calorie sources are created equal. Nailed it to no end, but even further, they've proven you can lose weight eating nothing but gummy bears. It's a really stupid choice. Like you're gonna have no hormones at the end, and you are also going to be really hungry all the time because the equivalent amount of like a steak and some broccoli is going to do way better for your hunger levels than the equivalent caloric amount of gummy bears. It's just a fact. Oh, yeah, like we're gonna talk about what we should eat. Food is really the answer, but the closer it looks on your plate that it looked in nature, probably the better off you are. But also leave some room for leeway in your life. You'll hear a lot about like the 80-20 rule, in that if you are well behaved, for lack of a better term, following your goals targetedly for 80% of the time, and then you give yourself a little 20% leeway, you can still see some pretty good results even with that ratio. And then when should we eat? It's very dependent on you and your goals and how much you have to get down in the day. The bodybuilder who has to eat 5,000 calories probably needs a different eating schedule than me, who's fairly sedentary a good chunk of the time. And it's also comes down to preferences. If you like breakfast, then you should probably eat breakfast and scale around there. If you really want to eat dinner later, then move to that, everything is adjustable, and we need to lean into our preferences to some degree. And then you are not going to do anything with food unless you are addressing